What would you do if your survival depended on silence, but justice demanded you speak? In a world where cruelty is currency and fear chains the innocent, one woman risks it all to bring light to the darkest corners. Welcome to our channel. Here, we weave stories that touch the heart and inspire the soul. If you love tales of courage, justice, and human triumph, you're in the right place. Please like the video, subscribe, engage by letting us hear your views, and share to family and friends. This is a tale of resilience, sacrifice, and a fight for freedom that will leave you breathless. Are you ready to uncover the truth? Claudia adjusted her headscarf and took a deep breath as she approached the gates of the ominous textile factory. The air felt heavier here, thick with a mix of burning oil and despair. A fresh recruit in the FBI, she'd been sent to this multinational company under the guise of a desperate single mother seeking employment. Her heart pounded with both fear and determination. This was her first undercover mission, and failure wasn't an option. She presented her forged identification papers to the gatekeeper, a burly man with cold, calculating eyes. He scanned her up and down, a smirk curling on his lips. "You'll last a week," he scoffed, before yanking the ID from her hand. "We'll keep this. No need for you to run away." Claudia bit her tongue and nodded, stepping into the compound. The factory loomed ahead, a towering fortress surrounded by barbed wire. Inside, she was met with chaos. Workers hurried along like ants, their faces hollow, their bodies hunched from long hours of labor. The rhythmic thuds of machinery drowned out their whispered conversations. "New girl," barked a woman in a stained uniform, shoving a bundle of cloth into Claudia's hands. "Room 8. Change and report to floor 3. And hurry up. No slackers here." Her room was a dimly lit dormitory that smelled of mildew and unwashed clothes. Rusted bunk beds were crammed together, with barely enough space to walk between them. She spotted a free bed, a thin mattress with stains she chose not to investigate, and placed her belongings down. A few women glanced at her, but quickly looked away, their eyes betraying a mix of exhaustion and fear. When Claudia reported for work, her supervisor wasted no time in humiliating her. Her uniform was torn and ill-fitting, her tasks physically taxing and unrelenting. The workers around her avoided eye contact, clearly afraid to associate with a newcomer. The first day left her drenched in sweat and despair, but she pressed on, silently observing every detail. The deeper Claudia delved into the operations, the more horrifying it became. Workers labored for 18 hours a day under sweltering heat, with no breaks beyond a meager meal in the dining hall. The food was barely edible, often cold, sometimes spoiled. Those who complained faced brutal punishments. One man had been beaten for accidentally tearing a fabric roll. Another woman, accused of stealing, had been dragged away screaming, never to return. The scars of the workers were not just physical. Claudia noticed the haunted expressions, the nervous twitches, the careful way they chose their words. Families were deliberately separated to prevent escape attempts. Some workers whispered about trafficked victims, forced into labor with no way to contact the outside world. Claudia's chest tightened with anger, but she knew she had to stay calm and strategic. One night, as Claudia sat on her bed scribbling notes into a hidden notebook, she was approached by Leila, a frail young woman who worked alongside her on the factory floor. Leila hesitated before speaking, her voice barely above a whisper. "You're not like the others," Leila said, her eyes darting around the room. "Why are you here?" Claudia froze, gripping her pen tightly. "I'm just trying to survive, like everyone else." Leila's gaze softened, but her voice trembled. "Be careful. They watch everything. The supervisors, the guards, they don't tolerate questions. If they catch you, what happens to the ones who disappear?" Claudia asked, her tone gentle but probing. Leila swallowed hard, tears welling in her eyes. "Sometimes they're beaten. Sometimes we never see them again. They lock people in the basement. No food, no light. Some don't come out." Claudia felt a lump in her throat but nodded solemnly. She couldn't afford to show weakness. "Thank you for telling me," she said. "Stay safe." That night, Claudia hid her notebook under her mattress, her mind racing. Every detail she recorded painted a clearer picture of the company's atrocities. Her instincts screamed at her to act, but she knew she needed more evidence. The workers' lives depended on it. The following day, Claudia's cover came dangerously close to being blown. During her lunch break, she slipped away to jot down notes on her encounters with Lila and other workers. She was so engrossed in her writing that she didn't notice the shadow looming behind her until it was too late. A hand snatched the notebook from her grasp. Claudia's heart dropped as she turned to face the floor supervisor, a man with a cruel grin and eyes that gleamed with malice. "What's this?" he sneered, flipping through the pages. "You writing a book or something?" Claudia's mind raced. She forced a nervous laugh, feigning innocence. "It's just poems. I write when I'm stressed. Helps me focus." The supervisor narrowed his eyes, unconvinced. He grabbed her arm roughly, dragging her toward the manager's office. Workers nearby avoided her gaze, their faces a mix of pity and fear. Claudia's pulse quickened as she thought of an escape plan. The notebook was damning evidence, and if the manager discovered its contents, her mission, and possibly her life, would be over. She needed to stay calm, to think like the FBI agent she was trained to be. As the door to the office loomed closer, Claudia took a deep breath, preparing herself for the confrontation that could make or break everything. The manager's office smelled of stale cigarettes and cruelty. Claudia stood frozen as the floor supervisor slammed her notebook onto the desk. Her mind raced. Inside those pages was a detailed account of everything she'd witnessed. Evidence that could save lives, but also destroy her cover. "What's this about?" The manager growled, his sharp eyes locking onto Claudia. She steadied her breathing, forcing a nervous smile. "It's poetry," she said, her voice trembling just enough to sound convincing. "I write to stay sane. This job, it's not easy." The manager snorted and flipped through the pages. Claudia's heart pounded as he skimmed, pausing at a passage about dark days and cages. He slammed the notebook shut and tossed it back to her. "Next time, keep your little hobby out of work hours," he barked. "Get out." Claudia nodded, clutching the notebook tightly as she left the office. She knew she'd been lucky, too lucky. From that moment, she noticed the floor supervisor's eyes lingering on her longer than before, and the guard seemed to shadow her movements. She couldn't afford another mistake. Days passed in a haze of exhaustion and fear. Claudia's health began to fail under the relentless strain. The factory's grueling schedule left little time to eat or sleep, and her pregnancy nausea added another layer of misery. Her body ached, her head throbbed, and she felt perpetually on the brink of collapse. Still, she pushed through, knowing the stakes were too high to falter. Then came the breaking point. It was lunchtime, and Claudia shuffled into the dining hall with the other workers. The air was thick with tension as a cop on duty, one of several hired by the company to maintain control, watched over the room like a hawk. Claudia recognized him instantly. A racist brute who often taunted the workers, his sneers and slurs leaving scars almost as deep as his fists. Today, he seemed particularly keen on her. "You," he barked, pointing at Claudia. "What's the problem with the soup?" Claudia hesitated. She'd already told the kitchen staff about her severe peanut allergy, but they'd ignored her. She tried to explain again. "I'm allergic. If I eat it, I could." "Could what?" He interrupted, his tone mocking. "Die. Don't be dramatic, princess." He shoved the bowl toward her, the murky liquid sloshing over the edge. "Eat." Claudia froze. She glanced at the other workers, their eyes fixed on their trays, too terrified to intervene. Her heart raced as she tried to reason with him. "Please, I can't." "Eat," he shouted, slamming his fist on the table. Trembling, Claudia picked up the spoon. The racist cop grinned triumphantly as she took a small, reluctant sip. The taste was revolting, but it wasn't the flavor that mattered. Within seconds, her throat began to tighten, her chest heaving as she struggled to breathe. She dropped the spoon, clutching at her throat. The dining hall fell silent. Claudia collapsed to the floor, gasping for air. The cop took a step back, his smirk faltering as he realized the severity of her reaction. "Someone get the medic," a worker finally shouted. Claudia's vision blurred as she felt herself slipping into unconsciousness. The last thing she saw was Leela kneeling beside her, tears streaming down her face. Claudia woke in the infirmary, her body weak but her mind racing. She'd narrowly survived the allergic reaction, thanks to another worker who had administered a stolen EpiPen. But the ordeal had shaken her to her core. The company's cruelty was no longer just an abstract evil. It had become personal. As she recovered, Claudia learned even more about the depths of the abuse. Lila sat beside her, whispering stories she'd been too afraid to share before. Workers were whipped for minor mistakes, locked in isolation chambers for days, and denied medical care. Those who tried to escape were hunted down, beaten, and brought back as a warning to others. Families were threatened with harm if anyone dared to speak out. Claudia's heart broke as Leela revealed her own story. Trafficked from her home country, Leela had been promised a job that would support her family, only to find herself trapped in a nightmare. She showed Claudia the scars on her arms, the result of being lashed for falling behind on her quota. "This place isn't just a factory," Leela whispered. "It's a prison." Claudia's resolve hardened. She couldn't let this continue. But her mission was becoming more dangerous by the day. The racist cop's attack had left her physically vulnerable, and the floor supervisor's scrutiny made it harder to gather evidence. Every decision felt like a gamble between her safety and the workers' freedom. That night, Claudia overheard a conversation that sent her spiraling into panic. As she worked late on the factory floor, two guards walked by, their voices low but audible. "The shipment leaves at midnight," one said. "Boss doesn't want any loose ends." Claudia's stomach churned. Shipment. She knew what that meant. The company was planning to transfer a group of trafficked workers to another remote factory, where they'd be even harder to reach. If those workers disappeared, their chances of rescue would be slim to none. She was running out of time. Claudia clenched her fists, her mind racing. She couldn't let the shipment happen, but she didn't yet have enough evidence to shut the entire operation down. Acting too soon could jeopardize the mission and everyone's lives. As she sat in the dark dormitory that night, clutching her hidden notebook, tears streamed down her face. She felt trapped, torn between her duty to the mission and her overwhelming desire to protect the innocent lives around her. But one thing was certain: she couldn't give up. Not now. Not ever. The dining hall buzzed with the low hum of whispered conversations and the clatter of utensils on metal trays. Workers ate mechanically, their faces drawn with exhaustion. Claudia sat at her usual table, quietly observing the room, her thoughts racing. Her notebook was safely hidden, and the hidden cameras she had planted were capturing the evidence she needed. But every second felt like a countdown to disaster. Her heart sank when the racist cop entered the hall, his boots echoing like a drumbeat of impending doom. His presence always shifted the air, filling it with dread. Today, his focus was laser-sharp as he scanned the room until his gaze locked onto Claudia. "You," he barked, pointing a finger like a weapon. "Get over here." Claudia set her tray down and rose, her expression calm despite the storm brewing inside her. She walked toward him, each step deliberate. The hall fell silent as every pair of eyes turned to watch. The cop leaned closer, his breath hot and reeking of tobacco. "Word is, you've been asking questions, stirring trouble. Think you're special?" "I'm just doing my job," Claudia replied evenly, her voice measured but firm. "Your job is to keep your mouth shut and do what you're told," he snapped. "No one cares about your whining, and no one's going to save you. You're nothing." The words stung, but Claudia held her ground. The cop, however, wasn't done. With a sneer, he balled his fist and drove it into her chest with brutal force. Claudia staggered and fell to the floor, gasping for breath. Pain shot through her ribs, sharp and unrelenting. The room was deathly quiet. Workers froze, their expressions a mix of fear and anger, but no one dared move. Claudia stayed down for a moment, her mind racing through her options. She could fight back. She had the training. But that wasn't the way to win this battle. She needed to be smarter, more strategic. Slowly, she pushed herself to her feet, every movement deliberate. Her eyes met the cop's, unflinching. "You're right," she said quietly, her voice calm despite the throbbing pain. "No one's coming to save me, but that doesn't mean I'm going to stop." The cop's smirk faltered, but he turned and stalked away, muttering under his breath. Claudia returned to her seat, every muscle screaming in protest, but her mind was clearer than ever. She had to act fast. Over the next few days, Claudia doubled down on her efforts. She began discreetly distributing messages of hope to the workers, slips of paper tucked under trays or slipped into pockets. They contained simple phrases. "You deserve freedom. You are not alone. Stay strong." The workers were hesitant at first, their fear of retaliation overwhelming. But slowly, a shift began. Lila was the first to respond, whispering to Claudia one night, "I don't know how you keep going, but you give me hope. Maybe we can fight." Claudia smiled, her chest tightening with emotion. "We can. We just have to be smart. I'll need your help." Lila nodded, and soon, others began to join. A few brave souls agreed to share their stories on hidden cameras Claudia had set up in strategic locations. The footage was damning. Guards beating workers for minor infractions, supervisors threatening families, and the brutal conditions they endured daily. The growing unity among the workers was palpable. They began to communicate in subtle ways, glances, gestures, and quiet words exchanged during breaks. Claudia encouraged them to trust one another, to hold on to the belief that change was possible. But Claudia's injuries from the assault lingered, a constant reminder of the ticking clock. Each breath brought a dull ache to her chest, and her energy waned under the relentless physical and emotional strain. Despite it all, she worked tirelessly to prepare for the moment that could change everything. The plan was risky. She needed to trigger an FBI raid on the factory before the trafficked workers could be shipped to another location. The evidence she'd gathered was strong, but it wasn't complete. Still, waiting any longer could cost lives. Late one night, Claudia slipped away from the dormitory to make the call. Her heart raced as she approached the small, hidden space where she'd stashed the burner phone. She dialed the secure number, her hand trembling, as she held the phone to her ear. "This is Agent Claudia," she whispered. "I have evidence of human trafficking and systemic abuse at the factory. We need a raid immediately. Workers' lives are at risk." The voice on the other end was calm but firm. "Understood, Agent. We'll mobilize. Are you safe?" Claudia hesitated. For now. But her safety was short-lived. As she turned to leave, a shadow loomed behind her. The racist cop stepped into the dim light, holding one of her hidden cameras. His face twisted with rage. "You think you're clever, huh?" he snarled. "This is what you've been up to." Claudia's blood ran cold, but she forced herself to stay calm. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said, her voice steady. The cop lunged, grabbing her arm with bruising force. "We'll see about that." He dragged her toward the manager's office, his grip unrelenting. Claudia's mind raced, calculating her next move. She had no way of knowing if the FBI would arrive in time. But one thing was certain: she wasn't going down without a fight. As the door to the office loomed closer, Claudia took a deep breath, steeling herself for whatever came next. This was it, the moment when everything hung in the balance. The manager's office reeked of arrogance and decay. The fluorescent light flickered as Claudia was shoved inside, the racist cop gripping her arm like a vice. The manager, a portly man with a permanently sour expression, looked up from his desk, his annoyance palpable. "What is this?" he demanded, his gaze shifting to the cop. "Caught her sneaking around," the cop growled, tossing the hidden camera onto the desk. "She's been spying." The manager's eyes narrowed as he picked up the device. His lips curled into a sneer as he turned to Claudia. "Well, well. Care to explain yourself?" Claudia stood tall, ignoring the pain radiating from her chest. Her heart raced, but her voice was calm and steady. "I think you know exactly what I've been doing." The manager's smirk faltered. "You're not just a worker, are you?" "No," Claudia said, her hand reaching into her pocket. She pulled out her badge and held it up. "I'm Special Agent Claudia Grant, FBI." The room fell silent. The manager's face turned an unnatural shade of red, while the cop took a step back, his bravado replaced with uncertainty. "You think you can waltz in here and shut us down?" The manager sputtered, trying to regain control. "You have no idea who you're dealing with." "I know exactly who I'm dealing with," Claudia replied. "A corrupt operation that profits from human suffering. Your time is up." The manager let out a bitter laugh. "We'll see about that." He leaned forward, his tone turning menacing. "Everyone has a price. Name yours." Claudia didn't flinch. "You can't buy me, and you can't escape what's coming." With that, she pressed a small button on her watch, activating a hidden distress signal. It was a silent call to her team, one she prayed she wouldn't need to use. Minutes felt like hours as tension filled the room. The manager's threats turned to frantic pleas, then back to threats. The cop paced nervously, muttering under his breath. Claudia stood firm, her resolve unshaken, waiting for the signal that help had arrived. Then it came, a deafening crash as the office door burst open. FBI agents stormed in, weapons drawn, their movements swift and precise. The manager stumbled backward, his face a mask of panic. The cop reached for his baton, but an agent disarmed him in seconds, pinning him to the ground. "FBI, you're under arrest," an agent shouted, cuffing the manager. Claudia exhaled, a wave of relief washing over her, but there was no time to rest. "There are trafficked workers here," she said urgently. "Some are about to be transported. We need to secure them now." The team moved quickly, spreading out across the compound. Claudia joined them, guiding agents to the dormitories and factory floors. Workers cowered in fear as the raid unfolded, many too traumatized to understand what was happening. "You're safe now," Claudia assured them, her voice soft but firm. "We're here to help." The words broke through the workers' defenses. Tears streamed down their faces as they realized the nightmare was finally over. Some clung to each other, sobbing, while others whispered prayers of gratitude. In the hours that followed, the scope of the company's crimes became chillingly clear. Workers shared their stories with agents, their voices trembling as they recounted the horrors they'd endured. One man spoke of being beaten unconscious for asking for a day off. A woman tearfully described how she'd been trafficked, her family threatened if she refused to comply. Another revealed scars from burns inflicted as punishment for dropping a tool. Claudia listened, her heart breaking with every word. She documented everything, ensuring no detail would be overlooked. Families were reunited as agents traced missing persons and confirmed identities. For many, it was their first glimmer of hope in years. Among the workers was Leela, who hugged Claudia tightly. "You didn't give up on us," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "Thank you." As the sun rose over the factory, now surrounded by law enforcement, Claudia stood on the edge of the compound, watching the workers being escorted to safety. The company's leaders, including the manager and the racist cop, were loaded into police vehicles, their reign of terror finally over. Claudia felt a mix of exhaustion and pride. The images of what she'd seen, the scars, the tears, the fear, would stay with her forever. But so would the moments of triumph, the smiles of those who were finally free, the gratitude in their eyes, the knowledge that justice had been served. In the weeks that followed, The impact of the raid rippled outward. The factory was shut down, and investigations led to the closure of other facilities linked to the company. Policies were enacted to prevent similar abuses, and the leaders faced lengthy prison sentences. Claudia was hailed as a hero, though she shied away from the spotlight. For her, the mission wasn't about recognition. It was about making a difference. She'd seen the worst of humanity, but she'd also seen the resilience of the human spirit. Sitting in her apartment one evening, Claudia reflected on her journey. She thought of the workers who had suffered and the courage it took for them to share their stories. She thought of Leila's smile, a symbol of hope restored. Her phone buzzed with a new assignment. Claudia picked it up, a determined glint in her eyes. There was still work to be done, still injustices to fight. She wasn't the same person who had walked through the factory gates weeks ago. She was stronger, wiser, and more resolute than ever. Claudia smiled to herself. This was just the beginning. Thanks for watching. We appreciate you. Kindly like, subscribe, and engage in the comments. Do let also know where you are watching from. See you in the next video.